the place I started first was who in our existing customer base would actually make sense as a HIPAA customer. So we prototyped the product with them and like built alongside them. So similar process, I asked them like, why does this matter to you? Why do you need to be HIPAA compliant? What are you afraid of? What are like your main pain points around this process? How would this benefit your company? How would this benefit you as a leader? And what was really interesting is we worked with I want to say it was like almost like a cannabis tech company, and we helped like create legitimacy for their business. And I think they took something like 90% of market share in their space because they had this level of compliance legitimacy. So once I kind of captured his story, I applied it to our kind of existing like product narrative framework. So, who is this for? What are the key benefits? How do the features roll up to those benefits? How can a person get started with us? Like book a demo. What does this process actually look like? I think a lot of we were targeting SMBs or early stage companies. A lot of them just like don't know anything about compliance. So even on our landing page, we would literally write like this is what it looks like. You have an onboarding call with a compliance specialist. You hook up a bunch of integrations. We'll pull all this data. Then you'll work with your CS team and your compliance team to fill in the gaps. Then we're going to connect you with an auditor, and then you're going to be compliant in about 2 weeks to 2 months, depending on the complexity. So again, just like holding their hand and eliminating any sort of question or confusion. So kind of used all that research to build this kind of story on our landing page. And then internally, in terms of like launching the product and building a lot of the sales enablement, what that looked like was one, building like what we call tiered launch framework is pretty common for most product marketers. Like how important is the thing you're talking about? How much work does it warrant? How many channels does it warrant? How much revenue will it drive? How much impact will it drive? So this is a completely brand new product line. So for us, that was considered a tier one launch. We wanted to make as much buzz about it as possible. Then what I do is I build a go to market launch playbook. So essentially, based on the tiers, I literally had like this checklist where I'm like, cool, we need a new website, we need a new blog, we need like paid ads, we need social media, organic content, we need probably a press release. So I'm basically like checking off all these channels that I think we can leverage to find customers and meet them where they're at and tell them our story. Then internally, I'm working with all the different stakeholders. So for a while I was the only marketer, so I like owned a lot of the channels. But as our company grew, I had like a growth marketer. I had somebody who did comms. We did have a PR agency. We did have a content person. So eventually, over time, I could outsource these channels. But when I first started, I was building and owning everything. Um, and then once you've kind of figured out your product launch process, it's just managing it through making sure things get completed, that you're keeping on top of everybody until launch day and you celebrate launch day. And then you're tracking whether it was successful, whether you got the leads you wanted, the website traffic you wanted, the press release hits that you wanted. Then on the sales enablement side, a lot of it was just like sitting with my sales manager and being like, what does the team not know? What do they need to know? And how can I make sure they're well equipped? So we had a very technical product. So I've literally built like a HIPAA 101 training for them in a tool called Lessonly. Highly recommend it. So essentially, it's like, what is HIPAA? Who are we targeting? I recorded like product demo walkthrough so they could actually see what the product looked like. I talked about who we can serve, who we cannot serve, what are the risks of our product, how do competitors stack against us? So what does the market space look like? So really equipping sales with as much knowledge as possible, and then making sure they had like their first case study, making sure they had um, I would say talk tracks if like a competitor was involved in a deal, like what you could say, how we're better, where do we tend to lose, like what are landmines they tend to set. So making sure they're equipped with all of that. And then we would do like mock sales calls right before the product launch, just to make sure people felt they were knowledgeable about the product they were about to go sell. Because being a HIPAA expert in like one day is not an easy thing, but we tried. And overall, I think the launch went really well, given that it was our first time having any sort of process around launching a completely new product.